So I just got back from a trip to Toronto and Montreal. Hello, it's so lovely to see you here today. I hope you're doing really well, and I hope you've done something nice for yourself recently. Just the other day, I was going out for a walk and I passed this house that had the most beautiful roses growing out by the roadside. So I literally did take a few minutes to stop and smell the roses. My friend Penelope and I were just talking about that the other day, and she said how every evening she goes out and sits in her front yard and just appreciates things. And I certainly hope that you find time in your day to stop and smell the roses too. Anyway, let me tell you more about my trip. Whenever I travel, I like to take along a sketchbook to document my trip, like this one that I took to the Caribbean with me a few years ago. It's really the best souvenir that I could possibly have. And for this trip, that was no different. I took along a ready-made book just like this one here. In addition to my sketching materials, I also took along some stuff to do some collage, and I also thought I might like to do some slow stitching while I was gone. I wasn't really sure what my slow stitching plans were. I thought I might do something with these hexagons that I found at a secondhand store. Or I thought maybe I'd do some random crazy quilting. But in the end, I decided that I would make a cover for my journal. And I didn't have as much time as I thought I would during the trip. But I did manage to get some stitching done. And this is what my piece looked like when I came back. As you can see, it's not anywhere near finished, but so you can see that my journal is a little bit more scuffed up than it was at the beginning. It shows that it's been used. It's had an interesting life, unlike that pristine unused journal that I just showed you. I have a bit of a plan going on and how I'm going to finish it up. So along the way during the trip, I acquired a few more other textile bits, like this little piece here. It was actually a coaster from one of the fancy schmancy restaurants that we ate in while we were in Montreal. This one was from a place called Bar George. It's supposed to be the prettiest restaurant in the world. It was very, very fancy, I have to say. So this piece just coincidentally happens to blend in so well with the colors that I've already been using. So I'm going to stitch this on here just using my usual when I'm sewing two pieces of cloth together. Two rows of running stitch, so a double top stitch seam there. And what do you think? Do you think that Bar George was the prettiest restaurant you've ever seen? It certainly was fancy, wasn't it? When I'm doing stitching like this, I just make one decision at a time. I don't know what the finished piece is going to look like. I've just decided that this is where this piece of cloth is going to be sewn down, and once this is sewn down, I'll decide what I'm going to do next. This was just one of several fancy meals we had during the trip. We also went to a place called Les Enfants Terribles. So that was also a very fancy but different restaurant. So because my little piece of cloth was overlapping with this other piece that I had, I just decided that I didn't need the extra bulk, so I cut it off and I'll use that bit for something else. Let's see how that fits in there. Yep, that all seems to be working well. Another place that we visited is called the Textile Museum of Canada, and I somehow acquired this fabric sample. At the museum there, they sell you these little bags. You can stuff as much stuff as you can into the bag. These are all rescued pieces of cloth that they sell there, and when you purchase something, they weigh it. And apparently between myself and my daughter, we rescued a half a pound of fabric from the landfill. This museum is very much about repurposing materials, which I'm all in favor of. And here's one of their displays here. You're wondering, what are those little lines attached to those garbage bags? Well, it's pieces of that plastic. It's been spun into thread or yarn, and what do they do with that? Well, here's an example: bobbin lace. That is made entirely from that waste plastic. So now I'm appliquing some of that cat cloth onto the outside. And this is interesting cloth. It's called double gauze. That means it's two layers of gauze, thin gauze fabric that are just tacked together here and there with some stitches that were done when it was actually woven. And while I was at the museum there, I did try my hand at one of their multi-harness looms there. And here's the blue section at the top is what I wove. And now I'm going to applique one of my little hexagons. These have been prepared for something called English paper piecing. So basically the cloth has been wrapped around a piece of card cut into the shape of a hexagon. If you were going to use it for its intended purpose, you would leave the piece of card inside and then sew lots and lots of these hexagons together and remove the card once you'd finished doing that. But I'm not going to be using it for its intended purpose. I am going to applique the hexagon like I've done with the others there on top of my surface there. And I just really like the way they look tumbling all over the place there. So it's going to sit right there, and I'm going to use something called a whip stitch, or sometimes this is called an invisible stitch, but mine's not going to be very invisible. And I'm using just regular sewing thread, so it's not going to be as noticeable as the embroidery thread, because sewing machine thread like this is designed to not show up. And I don't necessarily mind if my stitches show up here, but if I do this stitch the way it was intended, my stitches will be invisible. I'm not going to worry about it too much, and I'm just overcasting around and around. And because the edge of those hexagons is not a raw edge, it's a folded edge, I can just take the tiniest little stitch right into the edge of the cloth and then into the background piece, and it won't necessarily be visible. It's not intended to be a decorative stitch, so I like the way that looks. I've overlapped that piece with the corner, and again, making just one decision at a time, choosing what I'm going to do next rather than making all the decisions at the beginning, and this way I don't really need to put any pins in. And now I'm getting to the point where I can fold over those edges at the top and secure my cover for my book. It will be removable, but it'll have to do a little bit of work to remove it. So I'm going to fold those edges, that edge over, and just sew, just again with some straight running stitch, two rows, so that if one row starts to come unravel, there'll still be a second row of stitches holding everything together. And I'm not really doing anything fancy about the corners. I'm just making sure that not too much of the underneath layers of cloth show up, and then I'm just going to stitch right along that line there, making sure I catch both layers. So I expect that there will be quite a few videos coming out of this trip to Montreal and Toronto. There were so many things that were really interesting during this trip that I really want to share a lot of them with you. But this one, I know that a lot of people are here to see my hand sewing, and I notice a lot of people on the internet, when they're doing slow stitching like this, they will take all their pieces of cloth and plan everything out and pin everything down before they start stitching, and that's not the way that I work. Occasionally I will use a pin here and there, but often I'll do it like this. I'll just make one decision at a time. And I'm really glad that I did that in this case, because I didn't know that I was going to acquire these little bits of cloth when I started out on the trip. So if I had planned this out in advance and decided what my layout was going to be, then I wouldn't really have had space for these extra pieces of cloth that are part of the trip memories and that really make this piece so much more special to me. So I'm really glad that it worked out, and it's just coincidental. And you notice that while the Bar George napkin coordinates nicely with the cloth that I already had chosen, the cats really don't, and I'm quite all right with that. Not everything has to match, and that's how, you know, our life and our memories are like that. We don't curate them so that everything coordinates together. We do a hodgepodge of things, and they become the fabric of our life, and that's how I view my stitching and my art and everything. I don't need it to all match perfectly. Maybe having a big hodgepodge of things is not your style, but It certainly is my style, and it's not wrong. And here's the thing. While I was growing up, I was led to believe that art, especially textile art, had to be pretty and precise and detailed and coordinated, and it didn't suit my style. So I spent a lot of time growing up believing that the way that I wanted to do things was wrong. It's not wrong, it's just different. So if you don't like this, you don't have to do it. I do like it, so I have absolute permission to do this. And look at this. My journal fits perfectly inside the little bag that I got at the Textile Museum. Also not planned. The colors don't necessarily coordinate. And it's a little bit short. So I also got this other fun cloth. It's cats and chocolate. How could you not like that? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the bottom of the bag and sew that on. And oh look, here's another thing that I got. I got this little pouch from a day spa that we spent our last day of the trip because we had a late flight out and we had to be checked out of our Airbnb earlier in the morning. So we spent the afternoon at a very interesting day spa. I'll tell you about that another time, but I think that little pouch is going to get sewn onto my bag. And here's a quick flip through of my journal, and I will tell you it's not finished. I still have all these blank pages in the back, and I do have plans for them, but that's a video for another day. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.